Good morning, friends. Thanks for being here with us at Journey Home Meditation today. This is the morning sit. I am Michael. And I'm happy to be here today. All right. So I've been thinking about the last morning sit that I did for a couple days. It was on Monday. Today's Wednesday. So I've been sort of contemplating some of the deeper aspects of what it means, or not so much what it means, but what it is to have an unconscious driver. It's something that I mention occasionally, and yesterday I had a person ask me what that is, because they listened to the broadcast a couple days ago and they had never heard that phrase before. And honestly, I'm not sure that I've ever heard that phrase before. It's just one that I've used over the last few years to describe uh, this thing that we have that we are unaware of that propels us to do the things we do. I said, it's funny. I said almost those exact same words on Monday, so maybe that's cheating. I think I'm cheating. So I wanted to go into a little bit further what it means to have a behavior that is informed by our story, or a behavior that is informed by possibly something that happened in our past or a belief that we are holding on to, and how that behavior is doing its best to serve us, but it's serving us in a way that is not in our best interest. Uh, I don't know if that's clear or if that's sounding a little mumbo jumbo, but I'm okay to keep going with that. So I think maybe the best way to do that is to give an example. And the best example I can think of for myself in my life in this moment is to share a story about a realization that I had about some abusive behaviors that I was carrying out for a number of years, actually. And this is a level of vulnerability, sure, but I want to make sure to just check in with myself to not be exploiting my own and loved ones' pain to illustrate an idea. I think that it's okay to use our stories to share with others who may be going through this, but I also see a lot in our culture. There is an exploitation aspect to sort of the trauma porn industry, right? A dear friend of mine refers to it as trauma stay. It's this place that we get stuck where we continue to utilize trauma as this great defining aspect of who we are. And then we exploit the trauma. We exploit trauma as a way to manipulate situations. We use our trauma to uh, be abusive in some ways to the people that we love and the people in our lives. And so I want to be careful when I tell this story to check in to make sure that I'm not taking this story lightly, because it's not a lighthearted story, and it's not something that has just been uh, it's not something that's laughable, and it's not something that I have really the right, if I'm using um, right action, if I'm using right language, then this story is one that needs to be told in a way that honors how painful it was for myself and for the people involved. So just taking this moment to breathe and settle in my body and feel that. So, an example of an unconscious driver. Years ago, my youngest son was about 8 years old, and um, I found that I was having this repeated behavior of using um, somewhat forceful and aggressive language um, to punish my son. Uh, and in my mind in that moment, I was justifying everything that I was saying, and and then immediately following the moment, I would feel this horrible separation from myself, and I it was almost like when I was using the language to punish him or to shame him, essentially is what it comes down to. I was shaming and embarrassing him and making him feel less than from something that he had done. Um, I would find that in those moments, I would almost have this separation of who I am and the things I was doing, and then I would come back to reality and I would start crying, and I'd have to separate, and I did not understand. I did not understand, and this is so I'll just tell you one really really powerful example is that my son would like all kids, right, would like at night would stay awake later and he would eat a whole bag of Oreo cookies, or like a massive amount of cookies. He would spend all day sneaking snacks and eating the sweets because sweets are delicious and that's what kids do. And I would get very upset and I would say things like, you're so selfish. These are for everybody and you're taking them all for yourself. And I would be angry, and I would and in my anger and in this judgmental thing, I would shame him, and it would make him feel like he was being defined as a selfish person, or he was being defined as a problem, or that he was causing harm to people in his family for eating the cookies, or something that was somewhat of a compulsive behavior, because children have compulsive behaviors around things that feel good, like eating cookies, or staying up late playing video games, and all of these things that, as children, we are driven by things that are interesting to us, or things that feel good or taste good or have these awesome sensory experiences. So he was just doing what children do, and what he was driven to do. He wasn't doing it to cause harm. That was ridiculous, but that was the things that I was saying. And I did not understand it. I did not understand why I would be so angry about a bag of cookies. I didn't care about the cookies. And after I caused my son pain, I caused him to cry, I caused him to feel bad about himself, I would feel terrible, of course. And I didn't I didn't see why I was all of a sudden so angry in that moment about something that means nothing to me the next moment. I wasn't angry about that. It didn't mean anything. And I could not understand my behavior. I know I've said that a few times, but it's true. I could not understand why I was so angry and why I was so harmful. why I was being so hurtful. Flash forward a few years. Um, I guess it's about 6 years later. My son's 14 at the time. And this is the beginning of COVID. And so we're in lockdown. And at this time, we were living um, in like a camp that we had set up by the river at the house that we own now. At the time, the homeowner who we caretake for, he was back home for a few months in the summer. So we would set up these really nice camp down below, and um, for the 3 months in the summer, it was lovely. And I would wake up very early in the morning before everybody else, before the sun came up even, and I would begin my morning yoga practice. I became really dedicated in that yoga practice in the first 6 months of COVID, especially. And in doing this practice, I was beginning to strengthen my body, but I was also beginning to strengthen my vulnerability. I was opening myself up and opening my body in ways that I had not been able to do for maybe my entire life. And one morning, I was doing the practice and I started having these memories, and these memories of when I was a child, you know, maybe 9, 10. Well, no, I had to be 10 years old, 10, 11 years old. And my mother and father had divorced, and my father had remarried. And the person he married was a really angry and abusive person to me. She hated me. She was jealous of me. Um, she was so angry about my father's love for me that she saw me as a threat at age 10, and she would be quite abusive. She would wake me up by hitting me in the head with shoes, and she would yell at me regularly, and she would shame me in front of my friends and at the Moose Lodge where I grew up going to with my father, who was an alcoholic at that time, and her, who was an alcoholic at that time. I had lifelong friends there before she came along. Well, she would start telling them terribly embarrassing things and lies about me. At any rate, it was pretty abusive stuff. And I remembered something she would do is she would yell at me for eating the snacks in the house and tell me that my mom should send me with snacks when I visit my dad, because the snacks that she buys are for her kids, not for me. And I'm so rude and stealing from her family. And do you see the connection? Because I never had seen it before. And then I found the connection in that yoga practice that morning where I was repeating a story that I had been taught. I had been taught a narrative. I had been taught a story when I was 10 years old. And I never in my life had said that my stepmother was abusive at this point. I'd never said that I was abused. That's more important. I would say she sucked and I would say she was terrible, but I had never used the language that I was abused as a child, that this was an abusive relationship. And so I fueled my anger, and I passed my anger off all those years as kind of an anecdote. Oh yeah, my stepmom was terrible, let me tell you. And I would make it really lighthearted, but I never really understood the impression that that made upon me until I'm laying in child's pose in that morning yoga practice. And then I'm having the memory of her saying those things to me. I'm having this stark memory of that. And I'm seeing myself as this child, being, you know, feeling terrible about who I was, feeling insecure about who I was, and having this adult in my life who was supposed to protect me and care for me, being so angry and hateful towards me. And then I had the memory of me saying those very similar, in almost exact things to my son just a few years before. And it started to hit me. And there was a lot of realizations. And the main realization was, if I love my son to the level that I love my son, and I could still somehow find a way to say those very terrible, hurtful things that I had no intention to say to him. I didn't mean those things, but they would come through And that means that it had nothing to do with my son, and it had everything to do with some unconscious memory that I was having and playing out in my life. Then maybe the abuse that I received from her had nothing to do with me. Maybe she was given those narratives, those terrible words when she was a child. She was a very large person, and she had been a large person her whole life, and I was sitting there picturing this little girl being told that she eats too much. This little girl being told that no one's going to love her because of her weight and because of how she eats. And I'm seeing an 8, 9-year old, 10-year old little girl being shamed. And then there I am, 8, 9, 10, 11-year old little boy, somewhere in that same age range, being shamed. And then here I was as an adult with my child shaming him. And it was the carrying on of this disease, this virus of language and abuse that was unchecked and unnoticed. I was unaware of it, that was forcing me to play out the story. Because of my unawareness, I was I had no control essentially in that moment. And so I I have this experience, and I'm weeping and I'm on the ground, and I put it all together, and I brought myself into not just a forgiveness for her for the abuse she did for me, but forgiveness of myself in that moment. I didn't know any better, and I know that doesn't make it right and that doesn't make it okay, but it does mean that I can improve it. I have time to do this. I have time to make those reparations. But also, it brought me into a love for her for the first time in my life. First time in my life I could love that little girl inside of her that was just hurting. She was just hurting. And I brought this up on Monday night, not this story, but this next notion that what I saw from her was anger, but what she felt was pain. And what my son saw from me was anger, but what I was feeling was pain. And I passed that pain on to him through anger. I transmitted my pain as anger, which caused pain. So that morning I woke my son up, and I told him that story. And I said, "Do you remember when I would say those things?" And he kind of remembered. I mean, it was early in the morning, but I made sure to remind him, and I said, "Son, I want you to know something that I never knew. That had nothing to do with you. You were just a kid. You did not invite that level of abuse, and I'm sorry that I gave it to you, but I need you to understand now that you have it, it's going to be your responsibility to heal. And I'm here to assist and heal alongside you, but I need you to know that you have to find a way to heal through that pain and not carry it on any further. Now it's yours." And I know that's a harsh thing to think about, but it's real for me in that moment, and it's real for me now. But this is an example of an unconscious driver. There was something I was not conscious of that was driving me forward. I was propelled to do this thing because I didn't know how to be aware of why I would make this decision. And this is true for us in so many ways. Why it is we run towards sweets and unhealthy food choices when we are emotionally distraught, when we're in emotional pain. Some of us do that. Why it is we use sex as a way to not feel or avoid feeling some feeling of abandonment or rejection. And so then we pass on this abandonment and rejection to sexual partners repeatedly, or why it is we drink alcohol uh, compulsively, um, and thinking that we're just doing it because we enjoy it. I like a good beer and we're having good times and this is what we do, but not understanding that that may be true for some people, but there may also be an unconscious driver there for others. And when we have an unconscious driver, the problem is we can't control how the driving is going. We can't control which roads we're taking and what paths we're driving down. Not to beat that metaphor silly, but um, this is why it's important to use these practices, not just to feel good in this moment. This is not just about um, finding a moment of bliss. This is not just about finding some level of happiness in this moment. It's also about doing this work to heal ourselves, heal our lineage, heal our bloodline, essentially. I mean, I don't know if this is passed down through DNA or if it's transmitted through experience, but in some way, we are carrying these wounds. In some way, in carrying the wound, we are carrying the weapon, and we are also carrying the healing. It's all in the same place. The healing comes from where the hurt comes. There it is. But you can weaponize that. And you're more likely to weaponize something if you're unconscious and unaware of where that something is coming from. I'm happy to say that my son and I have spent a lot of time learning how to be vulnerable and open with one another and healing those relationships that were damaged uh, by abusive language. Um, and of course, nobody has perfect relationships, and we're all rubbing up against each other in ways that cause pain and wounding sometimes. But if we're present for it, if we can be present with pain, if I can show up for you when I'm in pain and not be ashamed of it, and if I can show up for you when you're in pain and not try to fix it, but to be present with your pain and you in that moment, then we can transform the way we relate to pain. And if we can transform the way we relate to pain in this moment, then we can work through our unconscious drivers to transform the pain that we've experienced in the past that maybe giving us coping mechanisms and ways to deal with it that are not ideal, that are not healthy, and that are not loving and kind. So I know that was a bit much of a story, but that was my story for a time in my life. That's something that happened to me. And I think that maybe it's relatable to some people if we are honest. We can find ways in which we are not always the victim, but sometimes in being victimized, we end up weaponizing that wound and becoming the perpetrator. We perpetuate the wound. So I hope that helps with a little bit of understanding about what it means to have an unconscious driver. Um, and maybe you didn't need an explanation of the sort, but sometimes these levels of contemplation can help to open up some understanding in ourselves. I know I listen to a lot of Dharma talks, and I listen to a lot of podcasts and audiobooks and poetry. And I listen to these things because I find those little bits of myself that I couldn't find. It's like a magnifying glass on my own life and my own psyche to hear somebody use just the right combination of words that makes the feeling that I have become understandable. You know, it becomes almost real. It realizes itself when I have the realization, hearing somebody be able to speak to that. And I'm hoping that in some ways, sharing these contemplations with you, you might also be able to connect to hear something about yourself being spoken aloud, maybe in a way you haven't heard before, maybe in a way you've heard 100 times and it just never quite landed. But the chat is open if you'd like to uh, chime in with anything from your experience or anything that you'd like to share. You can also reach out to me at journeyhomemeditation@gmail.com and share a bit of your story. And if you'd like, I can share it in one of these morning sits with everyone, or I can keep it just between you and I. Just let me know. But I appreciate you listening today. Listening is such a greater part of communication than the speaking, because when you have someone listen and you have someone hear you, it does create safety. And in the creation of safety, we have vulnerability. And I think that in some ways, many of us are wandering around this world constantly in search of safety. And in that safe moment, our soul begins to bloom. When you're with your people, we all have heard that, we say that, oh, these are my people. When you're with your people because you feel safe. You feel safe to be you. You feel safe to be quirky. You feel safe to be vulnerable. You feel safe to be sad or in pain or in joy and laughter. You feel safe to dance. And that's what this is. This is learning to dance. I'd like to read a poem that kind of touches on this before we get into the meditation today. Actually, you know what? Yeah, no, let's do that. Let's read the poem first. This is a poem by a poet named Adrian Rich. And it comes from the collected poems 1950 to 2012. So this poem is called What Kind of Times Are These? There's a place between two stands of trees where the grass grows uphill, and the old revolutionary road breaks off into shadows near a meeting house abandoned by the persecuted who disappeared into those shadows. I've walked there picking mushrooms at the edge of dread, but don't be fooled. This isn't a Russian poem. This is not somewhere else but here. Our country, moving closer to its own truth and dread, its own ways of making people disappear. I won't tell you where the place is, the dark mesh of the woods meeting the unmarked strip of light, ghost-ridden crossroads, leaf mold paradise. I know already who wants to buy it, sell it, make it disappear. And I won't tell you where it is, so why do I tell you anything? Because you still listen. Because in times like these, to have you listen at all, it's necessary to talk about trees. That's Adrian Rich with What Kind of Times Are These? I'm really grateful for poetry. I say it all the time because it deserves repeating. The brevity of a poem is such a gift. And because you still listen. So thanks for being here. Let's spend just a few moments with our breath today. And I thought even today, maybe we'll have silent space for this practice. So go ahead and find your meditation posture. It's your place where your body finds balance. Finding balance means finding that place with the least amount of stress or strain. So for me, it's elongating my spine and letting my shoulders relax, bringing my shoulder blades together slightly in the back, placing my palms facing upwards and my feet flat to the floor. But maybe it's different for you. Let's just find that space and spend the next few moments just feeling what it is to breathe in and out. We're trying to get beyond thought and into just feeling what it is we have to feel. Sometimes it's just a few moments. Sometimes it's more. But the feeling is, I think, some of the most important things we can do in those moments. Moving beyond thought, because thought is where the story lives, but the story can sometimes be a hangover from an older feeling. A feeling we once had comes attached with a story, and we can hold on to that story and attach it to every new feeling. So, a really good example is when something happens that makes us upset, we may revert back to the old story. We do it in arguments all the time, saying things like, well, you always do this, or you never do this. And we're reliving that old feeling instead of being present with the feeling that is and tending to that, taking care of that feeling like we talked about on Monday. Instead of taking care of ourselves and taking care of the feeling in the other person in that argument or in that moment of discomfort, we are rehashing an old feeling without even knowing it. And we think that it's justified in that moment. The level of anger, the level of fear, the level of discomfort, we think is because of what's happening in the moment. And it rarely is. It rarely is. So, in those moments that we take together to just sit and breathe and feel our bodies, it allows us to understand where we are right now. Maybe I said something that you want to reject. And then you're thinking, man, this guy's an idiot. Okay, maybe so. Or maybe in your feelings of rejection to close out of something, you are attaching to a time before when you felt like somebody was telling you who you are without it being true. So maybe you're just protecting yourself. I get that. I do that as well. And it's only in our ability to sit with what we're feeling as what it is that we are able to actually be in this moment with one another and be able to hear some guidance from each other, and mostly from inside of ourselves, letting our bodies guide us into what we need to take care of right now. And then it's much easier to deal with what's happening in front of you, whether it's something good or something stressful or something difficult, something easy, whatever it is that you're contending with in that moment. It becomes more rich, more enriched by your awareness of everything that it is in this moment, not what we are attaching from the past. Think if you looked at a sunset and you sat and you said, yeah, but yesterday's sunset was a lot more purple in these spots, and that was much better than this one. Yeah, but purple sunsets are better. And this isn't that. So this isn't really even a sunset, is it? Is it really? I mean, you should have seen yesterday's sunset. No, we don't do that. And we give that moment its due to be present. And that's the magic in a sunset. It demands your presence in that moment. And you give it. You freely give your attention in those moments. So if you can have that same level of intention and attention when you're having a feeling, a change, a shift, something uncomfortable, just think of all of the beautiful colors that you would see inside of that moment. So thanks for being here today. I appreciate you, and I appreciate this time we share. Reach out to me if you'd like. Journeyhomemeditation@gmail.com.